always get this suspicious feeling when companies make predictions and don't support it with some kind of reasoning. It's possible that there's an attempt to control these spiraling prices by creating a story that will change people's behavior. 2021 was a really hard year for many people in the real estate world. Believe it or not, both buyers and sellers had winners and losers in this past year's market. It was really rough for some buyers. The hardest hit buyers were those first-time buyers who live in the top cities where everyone is moving to. Many of them saw prices spiral out of control. They thought they were going to be able to buy a home for the first time in 2021, but as they were saving up for their down payments, prices continued to rise and they got priced out. I saw this happen to multiple people, but there was another group of first-time buyers who were big winners in the 2021 market. These buyers moved from higher cost of living areas where they thought they would never be able to afford a home. But when they moved to a new city, they were astounded at the home that they could actually buy at a price that seemed extremely reasonable compared to where they had come from. Relocation really changed their lives. Then there were the sellers. We had both winners and losers in the sellers market as well. Sellers moving from hot markets to lower cost of living cities or to small towns were winners. They were able to take the big appreciation in their home and relocate to less competitive areas and move up into a nicer home for what they sold their home for, and sometimes even for much less than what they sold their home for. The sellers that lost out were also those sellers who did not want to relocate. Sellers that were trying to stay in the same area. Maybe they wanted to be near their family, or they have an in-person career, but they had outgrown their home, or maybe they're empty nesters looking to downsize and stay in their same area. These groups of sellers really struggled, and some of them were just plain stuck and couldn't move. Because sure, you can sell your home easily and get a great price in this market, but doing that while hoping that a house that you love comes on the market can be an emotional roller coaster. Many of these people are hanging on, they have not sold, and they're hoping that things regulate a little bit in the coming year, and if they do, we might see more of these types of sellers being willing to list their homes for sale. And that is what we are talking about today. I'm going to show you some of the predictions from the economists at Redfin and at Realtor.com. We're going to look at where they agree, we're going to look at where they disagree, and I'm going to ask some hard questions about their predictions. Because as I was reading through these articles, I noticed that some of the predictions just did not add up with the information that they were supplying. It seems to me that someone wants to have their cake and eat it too. I'm also going to share how I think all of these predictions, if they do in fact come true, will impact the different types of buyers and sellers in the 2022 housing market. Prediction number 1. Both Redfin and Realtor.com agree that mortgage rates will rise to 3.6%. Realtor.com says they will remain around 3.3% for most of the year. Redfin says this mortgage rate increase will mean about an average of $100 per month increase in mortgage payments for buyers. Both Redfin and Realtor.com say the increasing mortgage rates are not going to lead to a decrease in sales. There will still be plenty of people buying homes, but prices are not expected to rise nearly as much in 2022 as they did in 2021. Realtor.com expects the median home price to rise about 2.9%, while Redfin expects that price increase to be about 3.2%. Redfin predicts that the number of new listings on the market will hit a 10-year high. Realtor.com is predicting that new existing home inventory will be up 0.3%, which I guess is why Redfin says this new supply will hardly make a dent in the ongoing supply shortage. Also, Realtor.com says that single-family home starts, which is a fancy way of saying new construction homes, will be up by 5%. And Redfin says new home inventory should increase from 2021's bottom, but we anticipate the market will remain undersupplied. And we're only going to have a slight increase in new construction homes. Okay. So here's my first, you can't have it both ways. Follow my logic here. These are the contradictory predictions that I am seeing. First, there's going to be very little new or existing home inventory in 2022. Number 2, there will still be plenty of buyers in the market in 2022. And number 3, prices are going to stop climbing in 2022. Now, the thing that bothers me about these two articles is that they haven't really given a reason for why they believe that these somewhat contradictory scenarios can take place. Not that weird things can't happen to disrupt the supply-demand dichotomy, and I'm going to get into some examples of what might cause the disruption, but supply and demand are the primary things that fuel rising prices. If there are more people wanting to buy homes than there are homes for sale, more demand than there is supply, which both Realtor.com and Redfin seem to be indicating there will be, what is the mechanism that will cause the lack of price increases? It has to be a drop in demand, but they're saying that there isn't going to be that. If we still have more people trying to buy than people trying to sell, that means bidding wars. How are prices not going to spiral further out of control if we have bidding wars? I have three possible scenarios that the economists might be thinking are driving this situation, and maybe they just haven't communicated it very well. It really bothers me that they haven't actually stated it. I always get this suspicious feeling when companies make predictions and don't support it with some kind of reasoning. There absolutely is the dynamic out there to want to manage people's behavior by selling a story. It's possible that there's an attempt to control these spiraling prices by creating a story that will change people's behavior. In this case, they seem to want to convince homeowners that it's finally safe to sell their homes. In my opinion, they're not very convincing. Believe me, I would love what they're saying to be true, because I'm actually one of those homeowners who wanted to sell last year but didn't, because I didn't want to get into that crazy market. If I could sell my home this year and get current prices for it but not fight with other buyers for move-up homes, I would be in like Flynn, baby.
Welcome to Sherwood, my lady.
Now, before I tell you the three possibilities that could potentially create a more balanced market, I need to explain something about the biggest share of first-time buyers in order for this to make sense. Millennials make up 37% of the buyer market, and this part is really important to my theory. 48% of older millennials, that's ages 31 to 40, are first-time buyers. If you fall into this category, I am not picking on you. I am not one of those people who picks on millennials. I think the millennial generation has done some amazing things for the world. And even though I'm a Gen Xer, in many ways, I really relate to some of the culture of the millennial. But this delaying of home purchases really is a huge part of the reason the housing market is seeing such craziness right now. Let me explain why. Before we get to that, I want to share something with you from today's sponsor. I want to tell you a story about something that happened in my house that could happen in yours. And if you don't have the right insurance plan, it could cost you a lot of money. And just fair warning, it's going to involve some blood. When my son was 3 years old, he was running in the hallway. 3-year-olds aren't the best listeners in the world, but he had socks on and he slid on the tile floor and crashed into the front door, which is one of those leaded glass doors. His little arm went right through the glass and he sustained what could have been very serious injuries. We were very grateful that stitches repaired everything with no permanent damage, but very aware that it could have been much worse. The injury itself is bad enough, but what if something like that had happened in your home to a guest? I don't know how many of your guests run in the hallway, but there's always something. A trip on the front steps or a slippery spot on your kitchen floor. Do you have the insurance you would need to cover the medical expenses and legal fees? If you don't have enough coverage, guess what's going to happen? The expense will come out of your pocket or out of the equity in your home. The truth is, lots of people don't have appropriate insurance on their home that reflects their current needs. My friend and today's sponsor, Michael Lynch, can help you. Michael is an insurance agent here in North Carolina, and he has put together a super easy and secure way to get an insurance review. If you're buying a home, he can quickly put together a personalized quote that meets your actual needs. Just click on the link in the comments and fill out the form so you can find out what it would cost to have the right amount of insurance coverage on your home. In many cases, he can even decrease how much you're paying for insurance. So click that link in the comments so Michael can make sure you are protected. The Smith family bought a home about 7 years ago. They've had a couple of kids, mom's now working from home and needs a home office, and they're feeling a little bit pinched in the small space of their first-time home. They're ready to buy a bigger home. The Brown family has lived in this home for 20 years. This is the second home they have owned. They bought it when they were about the age of the Smiths, and they've raised their family here. Their kids are now grown and have families of their own, and the Browns are getting tired of dusting bedrooms that nobody sleeps in and paying taxes on a house that is way too big for their current needs. The Smiths and the Browns are both ready to sell their home, and it's kind of neat because in a normal market, this is just a game of housing swap. It's a little more complex than that, but this is the gist. Enter the millennials. Two things have happened with this group of people that has upset the stability of the market. Now, obviously, what I'm getting ready to talk about isn't the only issue. The supply chain is obviously a big one right now, making it difficult for builders to get that inventory out. And both Redfin and Realtor.com agree that that issue is not going to be resolved in 2022. But the supply chain thing is really just salt on what was already an open wound. We already had a big problem. We just happened to get a second problem on top of it at the same time. time. The big problem was that millennials delayed buying homes. Of course, millennials came of age in the Great Recession, which had some impact on their decision not to buy, but there were several other cultural reasons that the millennial generation chose not to buy homes. First of all, they valued experiences over things. They preferred to travel and experience the world, and that is where they spent their money, rather than on things like saving to buy a home, which had been more typical of previous generations. Secondly, they stopped getting married. By not getting married and having children, the need for a stable home was less appealing, and having a single income, they were also less likely to be able to afford it. And number three, millennials didn't want to commute. They preferred big cities where everything was walkable, and because of that, housing costs in those areas were higher than in the more affordable suburbs and towns where previous generations had settled down. So, millennials continued to rent. But how does this all affect our housing market? Because millennials delayed buying homes, builders did not build homes for them. Builders only build homes when someone is there to buy them. The types of housing that is built for rental properties is very different than what's built for homeowners. People want different things in a house that they purchase than in one that they rent. So the construction that should have happened over a 10-year span as the millennial generation aged into home ownership was totally flat. The construction just didn't happen, and the pandemic shifted everyone's perspectives, and those millennials who thought that they didn't want to buy suddenly changed their minds. Well, you can't suddenly put 10 years worth of inventory on the market. Now that you get all of that, let me tell you the three things that could possibly happen or that have already happened that would make the housing market not as competitive in 2022 and make the Realtor.com and the Redfin predictions make a little bit more sense. Possibility number one, the massive pool of millennial first-time buyers that entered the market have for the most part completed their purchases. They've bought all the houses that they wanted, all in one big push over the last 18 months or so. The heat is off. We're on our way to a more normal market. Still tight, but getting better. Possibility number two, most of those first-time buyers have been permanently priced out. The heat is off. Those would-be buyers are permanent renters, and it's worth noting that both Redfin and Realtor.com predicted larger rent increases than home price increases in 2022. Rents are predicted to increase 7% versus 3% for median-priced homes. Another prediction from Redfin is that buyers will move to affordable areas like Columbus, Ohio, or Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. That's actually a clue that tells me that Redfin does believe a large number of buyers have been priced out and are going to choose relocation or renting. In that case, maybe the competitive market is going to shift locations. Possibility number three, there is still a pool of first-time buyers that took a break over the winter and is going to come back with just as much fervor in the spring. In that case, we're not out of this mess. If this is the case, these predictions make little sense to me. This scenario could result in a 2022 that looks an awful lot like 2021. And of course, the most likely, possibility number four, some combination of these three things. Now, I don't have the resources to gather the data that would be necessary to answer these questions or to figure out what is actually happening on the ground, but these are the questions that need to be answered. How large is our pool of first-time buyers that are waiting for their chance at home ownership? It seems to me that the predictions are counting on this pool being much smaller than it was in the past year. If their predictions come true, the winners and losers will look very much like they did in 2021. Those trying to stay in their home city with rising prices will be stuck renting or forced out to cheaper cost of living areas. Those open to relocation will get to take their equity with them and make a life in a new city. If you like this video, you might also like this one.